Okay. So I'm starting out this live stream for essentially for the month of November. And I'm actually revisiting a drawing I did for the month of October. I really got the feeling with this one that while I had created like a great degree of resolution or a degree of resolution that I was happy with, there's something in it that I missed. I had a kind of target that I was aiming for, and I don't think I quite got there. I did get to a point with it where I felt like I was quite happy about it, and but something kept sticking with me. It kept coming back to me. Kept thinking about a softness I should have made, or a transition I should have made, or a focus I should have created or eliminated. And so I thought for this live stream that I'd actually come back and revisit it. So I think there's actually kind of some interesting things that happen in those moments when you've kind of reached this maybe distance from your drawing, this emotional distance, and you can just forget for a moment maybe what your initial goal was, and deal with maybe the reality of what's actually there. And that's what I'm going to try and do during this stream, even though I think that probably it's going to mean that I'm going to work more on this drawing. Maybe I'll even film it so I can kind of put it out along with all the other parts of it that I showed. I think some of the things that I want to do really are around this side of the face. I feel like I was showing too much within the shadow here. And it was getting a little bit distracting, making the face look a little bit more, in a way, kind of cartoonish, which I'm not going to say like I always think is a bad thing. I think that there's graphic or cartoonish kinds of qualities that can be interesting to play with in a drawing. But they were reaching a place there that I don't think was actually helping very much. So yes, I'm going back and I'm kind of changing some of those things and reworking, like I said, some of the focus of the drawing. So I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit, and I had a couple topics that have become things that I've been talking a lot about, like at workshops and with students here at the academy, that I think are quite applicable to or interesting to you guys as well. And unless there's any really specific questions, and I'm sure that there can be, so just post them when you have them, I'm going to start just sort of talking about some of the things that are on my mind lately. Something that has come up, certainly when I was in the UK this last week, working with people who are primarily sculptors, was that while I feel like they were able to see things really quite well, their technique was something that kept their drawings from getting really truly resolved. And it's a skill building feature that's really important actually, is technique, and by that I mean just your ability to get your pencil on the paper to make a value as even and smooth as you need it to be. If you find consistently that your drawings are quite grainy, or you think that you're kind of heavy-handed with a pencil, really these are questions about technique that actually need addressing. So starting out with that idea, I can kind of take it into this area and say that there were also like kind of technical things about some of the modeling around this eye that I was not totally excited about. Someone's asking, do you ever consider your drawings finished, or do you always come back to them like this one? I think a really good question. There are drawings that I've just, I've passed beyond that inspiration. So I'll work with a model or something, and I think this is really great, and I've got this vision for this drawing, and then you do it. And then I think you kind of pass on from that creative place, like you just go on to some other inspiration. And at that point, you have to say, well, the drawing is totally done. But I feel like there's ones that like in your gut, or whatever part of us governs our feelings, that there was something you were trying to get to that you didn't quite get to, and so you want to return to that. This was one of those, for sure. So the answer is yeah. There's plenty of drawings that I feel like, it's done, I like it, or usually if they have sold, of course, you have to just, you move on from that as well. And there's some that you do a really good job on, and you think, yeah, great, I'm finished, and it was a success. But yeah, ones like this one. So back to technique. What I wanted to do is actually take a lot of the harsh edges away from this eye, and actually work with a lot more softness and a lot more unity, and take some of the focus away from this area. And so I'm kind of going around. Felt especially the shape underneath the eye here was really, really sharp and really harsh, and I found that it was, I don't know, it was creating a distraction that I didn't necessarily like. And also that some of the values, like here below the tear duct, were a little bit jumpy, just in terms of creating like too much contrast in an area, and I needed to kind of change that. If anything, like a lot of these values in the cheek are probably a little bit light for what they need to be. I think I was working on the forms of the cheek, and I think I wound up kind of keying them up to a place that was not so useful. And they kind of had not enough harmony with the values around it. There's other things also about this eye over here that I feel like, again, maybe in an effort to, like I was trying to, and this happens to me all the time, you're thinking that you're kind of in the wrap it up phase of a drawing, and so you start to maybe create some accents that are not really in keeping with what you're trying to do, but you're in this sort of finish it phase, and kind of changes your thinking, again, in a way that's not so useful. So I feel like that's happening, and it's something I need to kind of remove from this drawing, if I'm going to get it to work. Something else, I feel like I'm like just listing over and over like all the things that I think are wrong with the drawing. Sometimes that's the way I look at them. Yeah, there were other things also about maybe a little bit about some of the halftones in the nose that I was not like totally excited about. Thought some of them were maybe a little bit generic, which is to say like non-specific. It's a kind of term that we use at the academy that I remember when I was a student, I first had a teacher call my drawing generic, and I nearly crawled into a hole and never came out. But what it really means is that we're talking non-specific, which is to say, a circle or a square are kind of generic forms. They're geometrical. They don't. They're not full of detail and information, and eventually your shapes should be full of detail. That's where, or attention to detail. That's where a lot of the beautiful aspects of those shapes get to be exhibited. Yeah, something else that I think I've been talking about a lot is just like value planes. And since I've been working, I teach a sculpture course. It's anatomy based, so it's not very artistic. But it's for like two-dimensional artists who are learning anatomy kind of through sculpture. But one of the things you pick up when you start to like work 3D is how values, like the value here versus the value here, are kind of the equivalent of like planes that you would like slice away if you were working in clay or in plastiline or something. And I feel like it gives you a really kind of in-depth feeling for how values kind of have almost a bit of like a sculptural sense to them. Like you're using these values to kind of sculpt this block of clay, even though, of course, it's a drawing and really there is no block of clay. You're still kind of thinking about it like that. And it's, again, it's something that probably I can strengthen in this drawing. Maybe the planes of the nose aren't totally fleshed out in a way that I would like to. I also thought there were some things, I don't know if you can see kind of down here, I've actually put some teal, pastel into the drawings. I think it kind of creates a nice counterbalance to the pink background, which I've also, on the upper right-hand corner, like over here, I've kind of intensified. So you have this sort of teal versus a more intense pink. And I think that's also helping it work a little bit better. The first probably 15 to 20 minutes of the block-in video, I think are a really good example of kind of how I think about establishing a head on the page in sort of 2D, right? Which is to say they're kind of heavily linear. And, you know, like I said, that drawing, probably more than some of the other ones that I've done, I went kind of all in on the linear design in that one. And I think I think eventually it's going to be a really nice resource to look at. And I might even do some clips of that eventually. Been thinking it'd be nice to like kind of put audio onto some of those. I think, by the way, copying is a great tactic for sort of assimilating skill. You know, it's something that I remember, like from my days in Florence when I was a student, actually drawing tons of sculptures. If anybody's like traveled to Italy or been to any city with a great sort of history of sort of public art, public sculpture, you can see these brilliant examples of kind of translations of the figure in public, and actually drawing them or painting them, for that matter, if you're looking at paintings, is one of the absolute best ways to kind of get the insights that artist has to offer you. I found it kind of invaluable in terms of like how you realize when you're drawing the figure versus like drawing some artist's version of the figure, how much of a translation that artist has made, which is to say, like, you know, a drawing is very much a matter of things that you put in, things that you observe on the model and you think, this is significant, I can add this. In addition, though, there's a whole like world of things that actually you leave out. There's tons of information along the hair, you know, for instance, in this portrait that I've completely omitted. And the reason being is that I think when you're translating something from 3 dimensions into 2 dimensions, you're also kind of trying to create a focus, or like trying to show people most readily the thing that you were drawn to begin with, in that scene. Like, we take this drawing, for instance, the thing that I was most kind of compelled by in this, of course, is this downturned face and these eyes that just glare out at you. And so one of the things that I wanted to do compositionally was not take the focus away from that. So like when I was, if you guys remember this drawing the way it was before, here there was an ear, there was the line of the face. I had really put a lot of information into this area, but it was drawing all of the attention away from this eye. Just like I felt like some of the edges, some of the hard edges around here and around here were also taking the attention away from the eyes. So I felt I needed to kind of refocus. So there's a couple things that, always will kind of draw your attention in a composition. One of them is a sharp edge. So if you consider like this is a very soft edge, this is a super crisp and sharp edge, that suits my compositional model here. I want people to be looking here. I'm not interested in people necessarily looking here, so keeping that edge softer is an advantage to my goal with this composition. The other is a very strong contrast, right? So if we look here, we have a very strong contrast. It's in the kind of central region of the face. If I created like, for instance, like a really strong contrast here, our attention would be drawn there as well. Louis Sarno is saying, I jumped into watercolor because I thought it's beginner friendly. How do I get a realistic skin tone? I mixed in red and yellow to get orange, but did not capture what I wanted. This is a really interesting question, also because watercolor is very much about kind of layering. But I think the real question here is actually about how does skin tone work? So we can talk about it in oil paint, because really the idea is the same as it is in watercolor, because it's about what I would call color mechanics, which is to say, like when you look at your skin, you see a variety of colors, right? It's not just pink, it's not just yellow, it's, in fact, like if you look at some areas, you have very cold temperatures as well. So in order for skin tones or skin colors to look natural in an oil painting or in a watercolor, you need a variety of colors. So you need cool colors like the blue-greens in my veins here. You need warm colors like the reddened areas around my knuckles. And that context, that variety of color is actually what helps you to create a kind of natural effect. So if you're looking at like a painting that you've made, say it's an oil painting or a watercolor, whatever it is, and you feel like the color is kind of generic or non-specific, start to look for the cool tones in the skin and make sure that you have some of those present so that the warm colors have a way to look warmer. The next question is how many hours I've put into this drawing so far. I've lost track a little bit, but this drawing has taken me a lot longer than most drawings. Just because I think I was doing some experimental things like working with a background in duotone, like a different color there, and so I had more challenges kind of creating a sense of harmony in the picture, and I think I'm still kind of actually working towards that. Louis Stern is asking, may I copy some of your drawings for practice? Yeah, I think that's a fine idea actually. Especially, if you've seen, like, if you've watched the video of the process, so you kind of have an idea of what it looked like at each stage. I think that in some ways, copying the final version is good and interesting, but I think it might be really that copying some of the stages, in the middle would also be really interesting, just because like those are the places where I'm actually doing a lot of work is on those middle stages, and so the appearance of them is kind of full of different ideas, like how my treatment of light and shadow is at a given stage in a drawing, right? So the answer is yeah, sure, absolutely. I think this is Gohar asking, I've got so many questions today. Do you have any suggestions for what kind of fixative to use on drawings, or if it's best not to fixate them? I definitely do. So I'll show you the fixative that I actually use. So this is the one that I use. It's called Spectrafix. They market it as like the fixative that Degas used on his pastels. But that's maybe a little bit distracting from what the real point is. It is a casein-based fixative, so it's like milk enzyme, basically. So it's quite natural. It's a spray bottle, not a what's the word, like aerosol, right? Which is also really nice. And you kind of know what's in it. I don't know what other fixatives are made out of, so I don't necessarily trust them. So SpectraFix is the one that I always go with. Another question is, how can one have a Florence Academy of Art-like setting for subjects at home? Types of lights, angles, and if you have the time, I wonder if it matters if someone starts training for drawing, but only later in life. So let's see. Lighting situations are super important. And why don't I actually zoom out of this and I'll show you guys my, my studio lighting situation. So the camera's gonna get wobbly here for a second. But if I go up here, you can see this, yeah? Now this is 4 LED panels that I have like joined together. And if I take you around the other side of it, you can see that I have them hanging from the ceiling like this. Now, most of the time in my life that I've spent as an artist, I've worked with natural light. So this is like the first artificial light studio I've had in ages. And I think that really it's almost one of my favorite lighting situations I've ever worked in. I built it all myself, and eventually I had an electrician to wire all of the LED drivers together so that it goes to a single outlet, and then that single outlet goes down to this switch on my wall. So that's the lighting situation that I have, and like I said, it's one that I think is I really am so pleased with it ever since I sort of put it in. As for training for drawing later in life, I think that it's a matter of experience and time applied to learning something. I think there's plenty of stories of people picking up things later in life. You know, something I noticed between when I was young and now is that actually I know now much better how to learn how to do something. I think when I was young, I don't know that I was so super clear on like, how do you get good at something? I just thought you kind of pour yourself into it and you try your best and eventually something happens. And maybe you could make a synopsis that sounds like that. But the reality is there are certain factors that are going to make that experience faster or slower. One of those factors is repeating the same process in the same situation over and over again. Repetition is critical to skill building, right? So if every time that you draw a head, you're drawing it in a different light source, you're drawing it on a different kind of paper with a different material, it's going to inhibit your progress. It won't stop it completely, but if you have the same paper, the same materials, same lighting situation, these things will play a role in how fast you're able to progress in your learning. Someone's saying, I just started watching your blocking in videos. I was wondering if you had the steps while drawing, because it looks like you just start with a big mess perhaps, and as you start adding detail, it becomes a masterpiece. But like, are you just drawing what you're seeing, or is there more behind your mind, like structure or things like that? Absolutely, there is structure. I think that, you know, there was a time probably when I was maybe just starting to teach, when I would really make my drawings at every stage, you know, as clean and perfect as I could make them. Nowadays, maybe I'm a little bit more free about it because I kind of see how the stages blend together a bit, you know? Whereas maybe when I was studying, I needed to have a more clear separation in between them in order to kind of help me to kind of create a drawing. If things got too crazy, I would risk to kind of lose, some of the definition. So some of my drawings, probably are more structured than others. I think the one that is coming out this month, or I just put out today, the 2 videos I put out today, I think those offer like a pretty good crystallization of like how I think about a block-in, for instance. But also like the block-in is something that I do quite rapidly as well. It's a stage maybe that for students I would say, they could take longer in. Like the block-in is actually where a lot of the accuracy comes from. So if you don't do it well, it can be tricky. But maybe with experience I speed through it a little bit more. Someone's asking here that I've been working from photo reference. Should I repeat the reference style as well? I absolutely think so. Really, it's about lighting situation. Like if you look at the light in this picture, it's coming in from the sort of an upper kind of 3/4 angle, hitting the forehead here, hitting the cheekbone, hitting the upper lip, hitting the nose. It's a pretty, clear kind of light situation to work in. I think what you want to avoid, if you ask me, just, for a student just studying, is ambiguous lighting situations where you have like light coming in here and here and here and from up here as well. And it's really difficult for you to differentiate the sort of very light planes from the very dark planes. That's something that I would consciously try to avoid if I was studying. Those situations can eventually become like artistically kind of interesting, actually, like if you want to work with kind of multiple light sources and things like that. But again, in the name of skill building, I would say repetition of a slightly more simple lighting situation could speed up your capacity to kind of learn. It does bring up an interesting point, though. So we have students here at the Academy, we do long poses, right? So a nude. And we have 75 hours. As a student, you have 75 hours to complete that drawing. Remarkably, or it sounds remarkable anyway, I don't think it's remarkable, but at the end of it, students are often wanting more time to work on the drawing. Now, you would think, well, 75 hours, isn't that all the time in the world? Isn't that all the time you could possibly need? The answer is kind of twofold. It's kind of, it is actually more time than you can need. I'm not going to spend 75 hours on this. I'll finish it long before that. Maybe I've spent, 15 by this point. But what I think it shows really is that for students, the thing that takes really a long time in drawing is not really knowing where to go with it. And the better kind of picture that you have of where you would like your drawing to end up, I think the easier time you're going to get that. Now, we all have kind of an ambiguous picture in our head of this is what I want my drawing to look like. And that's good. I mean, that's part of having vision, right? But you could also say that until you have that picture in front of you, it's difficult for you to consider how to get there. What I would recommend is to take the work that you like, right? Whose work do you like? You like, Da Vinci's drawings. Do you like them? Put pictures of his drawings on your easel. Put them in your studio. Put them around you so that when you're drawing, your eyes wander for a moment and they're going to fall on that drawing. And some of the problems and some of the subjects that you're dealing with in your drawing, you're going to look to his solutions, for instance, for how he solved those, right? And this is a way that you can bring yourself a little bit closer to knowing how, like, where you want your drawing to go. It's a really big thing for a student, because eventually as an artist, you do have totally your own vision about where you want the drawing to go. Even in those stages, I still look at you know, artists' work and I think, yes, that crystallizes for me where I want my drawing to go. That's a solution that I can get on board with. That's the thing that I'm looking for that's missing in my work. Whether it's old masters or it's like your friend that you share a studio with, whichever, but try to take your inner picture of where you think your drawings, where you want your drawings to go, and try to bring that out into the world so that you can see it in front of you, so that you can really ask questions of it and try to figure out how to get to that place. Because again, like executing a drawing is actually not something that takes forever. Like just drawing this head doesn't really take forever. I think it takes a long time when you're trying to figure out why it doesn't look the way you would like it to look. That takes me forever. And that's what I'm dealing with right now in this one. It doesn't quite look the way that I would like it to look. It's missing some ambiguous quality. And I'm drawing now, trying to figure out what that quality is and trying to get it into my drawing. So how do you develop a concept for a series of paintings or drawing? Is it about subject, composition, similarities, or other things? And then also, which artist crystallizes your view? Those are powerful questions right there. Developing like a series of work, it's important probably that your inspiration comes from the right place. There's a quote by, I'm not going to remember this author's name, but I can synopsize the quotation, right? So he's talking about, it's a 19th century writer. Actually, he wasn't a really great guy, but he's a really good author. And he was talking about making a beautiful drawing. He said that if you make a drawing with the intent of glorifying the thing that you appreciate, like he was talking in this metaphor about like a bird's nest, you know? If you find that this bird's nest is so beautiful and you think, oh, it's so full of richness and detail and story almost in it, I want to make a drawing that crystallizes this thing. He says that you will proceed without difficulty. He puts then, on the other hand, if you begin to make a drawing in the hopes of making a beautiful drawing, in other words, not to kind of glorify the subject, but just to make something that's on its own is beautiful, then probably you will fail or you'll experience some hardship. Now, maybe we can say that you can still make a beautiful drawing if you're just trying to make a beautiful drawing. But I feel like there's an element of truth in that. Like if you contrive a series of paintings to make a series of cool paintings, I think it can become visible. I think people can see that in a way. Whereas if you come from a very genuine place and you say like, I love this thing, you know, I love my family, or I love cities, right? You love the urban landscape. If your goal is to show the world things about that thing that you love, probably you will make a good conception of these paintings, and you'll have a great chance to make great work. If the desire is to make a series of paintings, to make a cool series of paintings, maybe it will not work so well. And when I think of the name of that writer, maybe I'll try and make an Instagram post about it or something. Actually, used a lot of his quotes, 6 months ago or something on Instagram. But yes, back to the next question. Which artists do I look at that kind of crystallize my view? It's probably like, there's some people that you'd expect, but it's also some sculptors. there's a guy called, actually that I was just working with in England, called Audal de Juana. He's on Instagram, and I think a lot of the things that he does in his work, I kind of get how they're things that I've been like looking for in my drawing for a long time, but not really having a name for. So he's one that for me is, I think, a major inspiration. And maybe it's the distance that they're making sculptures, and so there's still kind of an abstraction there between like how I can make my drawings like their sculptures. But I also find it's a metaphor that I'm very comfortable with. I could see ways that I can imbue my work with those same qualities that I'm looking for. So yeah, probably most of these sculptures. I never do this, so I'll give a tiny like tour of my studio before I sign out. So this is one that I'm working on now. I've just kind of blocked in his head. Some of you might have seen it, and it's part of like a cityscape that I'm working on that I don't know how I feel about it yet, but it's something. This is a very old graphite drawing. I did this in 2008. But some of the modeling I think was really nice in this one. And then I have this one. It's like actually just a head that I just started blocking in from memory. Clearly I have to shave that nose down a bit, huh? I've got the drawing that I'm doing for Patreon this month of Alyssa. Or not Alyssa, sorry, Alina. It's her name, and then there's these guys. Nude that I did for the summer school students, and double portrait here. Let's see. And a couple of sculptures that I picked up while I was in the UK. And then this one actually, this is a sculpture by this guy called Audal de Juana. Fantastic stuff. And maybe we can end with Rodin's Pierre de Wissant. I have a little miniature head of one of Rodin's sculptures. Very proud of that one. Ooh, wait a minute. Actually, this is Grzegorz Gwiazda's work. Fantastic artist. Special stuff. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for stopping by. And like I said, this will be available pretty soon on Patreon.